Chapter 12. Promotion to First Lieutenant, Capture of the City of Mexico, the Army, Mexican Soldiers, Peace Negotiations. On entering the city, the troops were fired upon by the released convicts, and possibly by deserters and hostile citizens. The streets were deserted, and the place presented the appearance of a city of the dead, except for this firing by unseen persons from housetops, windows, and around corners. In this firing, the lieutenant colonel of my regiment, Garland, was badly wounded. Lieutenant Sidney Smith, of the 4th Infantry, was also wounded mortally. He died a few days after, and by his death, I was promoted to the grade of first lieutenant. I had gone into the Battle of Palo Alto in May 1846. A second lieutenant and I entered the city of Mexico 16 months later with the same rank, after having been in all the engagements possible for any one man and in a regiment that lost more officers during the war than it ever had present at any one engagement. My regiment lost 4 commissioned officers, all senior to me, by steamboat explosions during the Mexican War. The Mexicans were not so discriminating. They sometimes picked off my juniors. You are listening this book at VolantLife Radio. General Scott soon followed the troops into the city and state. I wonder that he was not fired upon, but I believe he was not. At all events, he was not hurt. He took quarters at first in the halls of the Montezumas, and from there issued his wise and discreet orders for the government of a conquered city, and for suppressing the hostile acts of liberated convicts, already spoken of, orders which challenged the respect of all who study them. Lawlessness was soon suppressed, and the city of Mexico settled down into a quiet, law-abiding place. The people began to make their appearance upon the streets without fear of the invaders. Shortly afterwards, the bulk of the troops were sent from the city to the villages at the foot of the mountains, 4 or 5 miles to the south and southwest. Note: it had been a favorite idea with General Scott for a great many years before the Mexican War to have established in the United States a soldier's home, patterned after something of the kind abroad, particularly, I believe, in France. He recommended this uniformly, or at least frequently, in his annual reports to the Secretary of War, but never got any hearing. Now, as he had conquered the state, he made assessments upon the different large towns and cities occupied by our troops in proportion to their capacity to pay, and appointed officers to receive the money. In addition to the sum thus realized, he had derived, through capture at Cerro Gordo, sales of captured government tobacco, etc., sums which swelled the fund to a total of about $220,000. Portions of this fund were distributed among the rank and file, given to the wounded in hospital, or applied in other ways, leaving a balance of some $118,000 remaining unapplied at the close of the war. After the war was over, and the troops all home, General Scott applied to have this money, which had never been turned into the Treasury of the United States, expended in establishing such homes as he had previously recommended. This fund was the foundation of the Soldiers' Home at Washington City, and also one at Harrodsburg, Kentucky. The latter went into disuse many years ago. In fact, it never had many soldiers in it, and was, I believe, finally sold. Whether General Scott approved of the Mexican War and the manner in which it was brought about, I have no means of knowing. His orders to troops indicate only a soldierly spirit, with probably a little regard for the perpetuation of his own fame. On the other hand, General Taylor's, I think, indicate that he considered the administration accountable for the war and felt no responsibility resting on himself further than for the faithful performance of his duties. Both generals deserve the commendations of their countrymen and to live in the grateful memory of this people to the latest generation. Earlier in this narrative, I have stated that the plain, reached after passing the mountains east of Perote, extends to the cities of Puebla and Mexico. The route traveled by the army before reaching Puebla goes over a pass and a spur of mountain, coming up from the south. This pass is very susceptible of defense by a smaller against the larger force. Again, the highest point of the roadbed between Veracruz and the city of Mexico is over Rio Frio Mountain, which also might have been successfully defended by an inferior against a superior force. But by moving north of the mountains and about 30 miles north of Puebla, both of these passes would have been avoided. The road from Perote to the city of Mexico, by this latter route, is as level as the prairies in our west. Arriving due north from Puebla, troops could have been detached to take possession of that place, and then proceeding west with the rest of the army, no mountain would have been encountered before reaching the city of Mexico. It is true this road would have brought troops in by Guadalupe, a town, church, and detached spur of mountain about 2 miles north of the capital, all bearing the same general name, and at this point, Lake Texcoco comes near to the mountain, which was fortified both at the base and on the sides. But troops could have passed north of the mountain and come in only a few miles to the northwest, and so flanked the position as they actually did on the south. It has always seemed to me that this northern route to the city of Mexico would have been the better one to have taken. But my later experience has taught me 2 lessons. First, that things are seen plainer after the events have occurred. Second, that the most confident critics are generally those who know the least about the matter criticized. I know just enough about the Mexican War to approve heartily of most of the generalship, but to differ with a little of it. It is natural that an important city like Puebla should not have been passed with contempt. It may be natural that the direct road to it should have been taken, but it could have been passed, its evacuation ensured, and possession acquired without danger of encountering the enemy in intricate mountain defile. In this same way, the city of Mexico could have been approached without any danger of opposition, except in the open field. But General Scott's successes are an answer to all criticism. He invaded a populous country, penetrating 260 miles into the interior, with a force at no time equal to 1/2 of that opposed to him. He was without a base. The enemy was always entrenched, always on the defensive, yet he won every battle. He captured the capital and conquered the government. Credit is due to the troops engaged, it is true, but the plans and the strategy were the generals. I had now made marches and been in battle under both General Scott and General Taylor. The former divided his force of 10,500 men into 4 columns, starting a day apart, and moving from Puebla to the capital of the nation, when it was known that an army more than twice as large as his own stood, ready to resist his coming. The road was broad, and the country open except in crossing the Rio Frio mountain. General Taylor pursued the same course in marching toward an enemy. He moved even in smaller bodies. I never thought at the time to doubt the infallibility of these 2 generals and all matters pertaining to their profession. I supposed they moved in small bodies, because more men could not be passed over a single road on the same day with their artillery and necessary trains. Later, I found the fallacy of this belief. The rebellion, which followed as a sequence to the Mexican War, never could have been suppressed if larger bodies of men could not have been moved at the same time than was the custom under Scott and Taylor. You are listening to this book at VolantLife Radio. The victories in Mexico were, in every instance, over vastly superior numbers. There were two reasons for this. Both General Scott and General Taylor had such armies as are not often got together. At the battles of Palo Alto and Resaca de la Palma, General Taylor had a small army, but it was composed exclusively of regular troops under the best of drill and discipline. Every officer, from the highest to the lowest, was educated in his profession, not at West Point necessarily, but in the camp and garrison, and many of them in Indian wars. The rank and file were probably inferior, as material out of which to make an army, to the volunteers that participated in all the later battles of the war, but they were brave men, and then drill and discipline brought out all there was in them. A better army, man for man, probably never faced an enemy than the one commanded by General Taylor in the earliest two engagements of the Mexican War. The volunteers who followed were of better material, but without drill or discipline at the start. They were associated with so many disciplined men and professionally educated officers that when they went into engagements, it was with a confidence they would not have felt otherwise. They became soldiers themselves almost at once. All these conditions we would enjoy again in case of war.